the idea that your personality is formed when you're 5 is ridiculous, and that's we know now in psychology from studies that's not true. You can completely change.
Hey, it's Walter here, and you're at the Think Profit podcast, where we're going to help you develop a rock-solid trading confidence and avoid the potentially endless cycle of system switching. Right, Hugh?
That's right. We're going to help you develop a wealth mindset, develop a trading strategy that fits your core personality, and help you overcome the obstacles that stop over 90% of traders.
All right, Hugh, sounds good. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do this.
Hey, Walter, I thought we could talk about personality tests. I know you've given people quite a few. I've taken a few. And how can they help traders? And is it better to take multiple tests or just rely on one test? And what have you tried before?
Right. Well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, I guess. If you take your car into the to get serviced, or like something's wrong with your car, they're going to ask you a few questions like, does it shimmy when you go up a hill? Or does it squeak? Does it make a noise when you stop? You know what I mean? Like, they're going to ask you some questions, right? It's the same thing in psychology, I guess, is what are you trying to do? So, like, if you're trying to find out what you do really well, or your default mode is, or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Or are you trying to find out, like, if you have some challenges that might not be that you might not be aware of right now? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If that's what you're doing. Because psychology is such a screwy science, and some people would say it's not a science. There's a lot of it's so new. And it's so complex. There's a lot of, because people are different, right, and complex. There's a lot of different theories about what personality even is, right? So because of that, you have all these different tests that are all meant to test the same thing, right? Yeah. And I guess in some ways you would have that in other sciences. Like, even in medicine, there are different approaches to health, and some that are not the traditional allopathic medicine way of trying to deduce what's going on. So there's a lot of different, it's throughout life, it's like that. But I guess from my point of view, my question has always been, with a trader, where are the things that are going to be difficult for you in terms of your personality and your trading, and what are the things that are going to be that you can leverage, right? What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, sort of thing. And so in trading, the things that I know that we got to look out for are impulsiveness. So that's like the tendency to just kind of like, quickly take a risk or something. Those sorts of people that will like get on a plane right now and go to another country, sort of thing, right? I guess, back in the days when you used to be able to do that. Yeah. So, someone so-and-so says that the euro is going to go up, so I'm just going to take a trade on the euro. Has nothing to do with anything I've back tested or anything. It's just a tip, right? Or something. So if you're impulsive and you're willing to just kind of do it on with little reflection or consideration of the risks, that can be a difficult thing for traders. On the other side of that, if you're conscientious and you're very deliberate and you're very measured, you kind of follow the steps whenever you do something. If that's your mode of operation, very conscientious, that's really good. I mean, it can run into problems with having difficulty pulling the trigger and so forth. But so when I designed the trading test that you're talking about, that I've given to thousands of traders around the world, what I was trying to figure out was, what kind of market are you most comfortable with trading? Like, what's your style, right? Because we know that most traders, and I know this now after surveying people, but we know that most traders like to take reversal trades. Most traders are more comfortable finding the high or the low and trading off of that, because it's such a, visually. I mean, I was like that when I first started trading. It's so visual to see that high or that low on the chart and go, wow, if I had just gotten in there, sort of thing. Right. Yeah. So that's a really common thing. So I guess I would say it depends on what you're looking for. If you want the Big Five test, I can link people up to a free Big Five test. Big Five is has a lot of followers in psychology in terms of the Big Five personality. So you could take that test. There are other ones like the 16 PF or whatever, or the Myers-Briggs, and the there's a guy named, I think his name's Howard Gardner. So his intelligence is defined as like, there's all these different domains. So you might be really good kinesthetic intelligence, like an athlete or a ballet dancer, whereas other people are really good with interpersonal. So they're really good at like interpersonal relationships and really kind of connecting with people. So it's not sort of the broad domains that that's in the big five. So the big five tries to boil it down to basically 5 things where you're on one end of the scale or the other, or it could be somewhere in the, near the middle or something like that. So, but I'll give you guys the link to the big 5 if you'd like to have a look at that. So I guess my question would be, if someone wants to do a personality test, what are you trying to figure out? That's the, you know what I mean? That's the overarching kind of point.
Yeah, no, totally. I think Colby's another big one too, right?
Oh yeah, Kobe. Yeah, so Kobe's really interesting. That's a new one that I came up on the last 6 years. That's basically, exactly what you're saying. About 7 years ago, I found that one. So that one is, what do you do well, right? So it's kind of like, this is the interesting thing about Kobe, because the psychologists have been talking about things about personality in terms of how you think and how you think about the world. So an introvert sees the world very differently to an extrovert. Extrovert sees crowds, lots of action, parties, a restaurant where lots of people are talking and there's a lot of, stuff going on. They get energy from that. Whereas an introvert gets energy from just sort of like decompressing, being alone, that sort of thing, right? So they see the world differently. But with Kobe, that is about what you do in the world. So it's not really about what you think, it's about what you do. It's not academic in a sense that I think it was designed like in the workplace to find out, for managers to figure out how, what am I going to do with this person in my team so that I can get the most out of them? You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that's true, but I'm guessing that's where it probably came from. That sort of that IO, it's called IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology, where it's kind of like applied to business sort of thing, right? So I think that's where that came from. So so that's a really good one too for people who are trying to figure out, how do I do things? How do I do things in the world? So it's not about thinking or considering or the way you see the world. It's actions. So that's really good for people who are trying to come up with a trading plan and figure out an approach to the markets and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, those are great suggestions. I think another thing to consider also is that there's no one best personality test, right? I think a lot of people get stuck on that and they say, oh, the Myers-Briggs is the best thing or the Colby's the best thing or whatever. But I think each one has its strengths. So you have to kind of like take a few, see what each test has to offer, and then kind of take the ones that resonate and leave the ones that don't.
Yeah, exactly. And just like what you said, it's also true that there's no one ideal personality for trading as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be like gradations of things that fit really well with trading and things that don't. So like you'll find on the internet people talking about the INTJ personality, which is the Myers-Briggs INTJ. So that's introvert, neurotic, I don't know what T is, something, and then J, justice or something. I don't know, but that I'm not up on the Myers-Briggs, but they say like that that's the perfect personality for trading. So I wouldn't get caught up in that if you take the Myers-Briggs and you find out. I can give you guys a link to the Myers-Briggs too, but that you're not INTJ or whatever, right? Like that's just, do you know what I mean? Like that's not. I think I am INTJ. I think I took it on. I'm either INTJ or INT, the other thing that's not J. I'm not sure, INTF or INT, whatever the dichotomy is with J. But yeah, so I mean, it's not. I don't like. I wouldn't like. It's the same thing like your horoscope or whatever. You get the because personality changes. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Like people will say to you, "Hey, Hugh, your personality was formed when you were 5," or "Hey, Hugh, you got to be really, really careful with your kid when they're growing up and get to age 5 because that's when their personality is formed." That's a bunch of bunk. Like anyone who knows that, like if you've ever been someplace, actually you've been someplace in a certain situation and then you move to another area and then you have new friends and a new environment and you actually change and then you move to another place. Right. And that's why I think I've always liked moving because you get to be like a new person. You know what I mean? You go to these places and you kind of adapt and you learn from other people and stuff. And so the idea that your personality is formed when you're 5 is ridiculous, and that's we know now in psychology from studies that's not true. You can completely change and become I became very outgoing when I went to graduate school. I was pretty introverted up to the point where I went to graduate school, and I became more outgoing than I was before. And that was like a deliberate attempt for me to kind of become more extroverted, become more like sensation seeking in the world. You know what I mean? So so that's another thing to remember, that if you score a certain thing and you think, oh no, you can become more conscientious if you're worried about that. If you worry that your conscientiousness score is low on the big 5, you can you could totally change that. It's not something that's set in stone. So that's
Yeah, no, totally. Another resource to look at that I found was useful was Principles by Ray Dalio. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't. I
Okay,
know who
so
Ray
when,
Dalio is, though. Yeah.
yeah, he basically profiles all of his employees or whatever, and he gives them baseball cards, what he calls baseball cards, and they have their, personality traits on there. And obviously that can change, like you said, but I think it was a really useful thing to keep in mind because if you know what your traits are, at least for now, you can kind of like, either change them or play to their strengths or whatever. And I think that that's a really cool concept that he explained in that book.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, that's totally cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I don't know. I've never found Myers-Briggs that useful. Like I look at it, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's just me. Maybe somebody else thinks it's useful. But I think some other things to look at also are like these books that give personality types. And like I mentioned before, Trading Sex and Dying, I think is a good one. And it not necessarily to fit yourself into a box, but to kind of like see, okay, where do I stand relative to other people? And I think that could be something useful. You talked about horoscopes. I'm going to get on my horse and ride off the ranch right now. But I think that if you go with like a qualified Vedic astrologer who reads your birth chart, I think nothing is set in stone, like you said, but I think there are tendencies. So like if, I had reading and I sat down with her for like 90 minutes, right? And she got everything right. Like it blew my mind, everything right. And so I kind of, at that point, I was like, okay, this is probably a science somehow, right? And I think that is another thing that can also help you understand who you are, what your core maybe personality type is like. And obviously that can change, but there are those tendencies that everybody has, I think, right? And I think those are a couple other things that you can use to go beyond the basic personality test.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point. I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about the last 2 years is this idea, like you bring up Vedic astrology, right? Mm-hmm. And, one thing that I've kind of, and I see more and more examples of this, like when you see things that are like thrown away in the corner and put away as, not useful or pseudoscience or something like that. Like if you go back and look throughout history, a lot of times what's happening is there are really good things, really useful things mm-hmm. that are kind of shunned for whatever reason, mm-hmm. to the advantage of some other group or, domain, like another approach. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can go back in time and see the direction that medicine has taken, or like you say, like astrology, or there are certain forks in the road where it's like, wow, we could have totally gone down this other path, but we ended up here. And it's the same in anything, right? Like with a country, the way that a country ends up mm-hmm. could have totally gone different if there was just a slight, you know what I mean? If there was just a slight difference at this key juncture. And I think I'm at the point now where I am, because I look back, like when I was in academia, when I was in teaching courses in college and stuff, and I was doing my degree in psychology, my doctorate in experimental psychology. And I look back, like the dominant thinking back then. Okay, so this is like 20 years ago, right? Or more. That thinking back then, a lot of that stuff that everyone thought was definitely true has been proven, or I don't know if proven is a big word, and it's a key word to use in science. You're not supposed to release. You just find evidence for, evidence against, right? Mm. So I don't want to say proven, but there are a lot of things that we thought that were true. And today there are some questions about whether it was valid to, go down that road. Mm-hmm. And so I am like, when you say that, like, some people might think, oh, Vedic astrology, and they turn off. Like I think of the Chinese astrology, how can there only be like 11 types of people or whatever? But apparently there, the rat, the ox, all that stuff, the dragon and stuff. Mm-hmm. But apparently like it's more nuanced than that. It's not just the year that you're born. There's like, if you drill down, I never knew that until recently, but like, I always think about these things that have been thrown away, and I think maybe there is something there. Just because it's been thrown away and officialdom has mm-hmm. thrown it away doesn't mean that there's nothing there, right? Because if you go back in history, you see this over and over again, where things were thrown away that everyone thought, oh, that's definitely wrong. Mm-hmm. Turns out that actually there was something there.
Yeah,
So,
no, you've basically
yeah.
just described the past 3 years of my life.
Yeah.
So anything that's in a book, I have the tendency to think, okay, that's probably wrong. So what else is there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think we're not alone, right? Like there's a lot of people right now that are questioning
yeah,
going through that exact same process right now
Narratives,
at this
yeah.
moment. Yeah. So people are everything is kind of shifting right now. It's kind of turning around. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. So yeah. So I think we're not alone. A lot of people listening to this are probably doing the same thing. Things that were thrown away and thought of just ridiculous are being re-examined from a slightly different light. Going, wow, maybe that's interesting. Maybe there is some, that sort of thing. So I just want to, I think, because that's a personality trait in itself. Openness, the openness to new ideas, the openness to new experiences, openness, right? Like that openness idea. How open are you to, and how dogmatic are you versus how open are you to new ideas? Like that's another thing to consider. So
yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, I think that
worth.
if there's a personality test that we haven't mentioned, or if we have mentioned one and you don't think it's valid or whatever, just give it a try. Try it out and see if it works for you or not. And I think that goes for anything in life.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Walter.
All information in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not trading or investment advice.